I love you. So, Godzilla got an official trailer this week, so I'm going to talk about that. Godzilla, his original film, was released in November of 1954 to huge box office success, and an American version was very quickly made later, which was virtually the same film, but with reshoots starring American star Raymond Burr as an American journalist character so that Western audiences could follow the story better. The American version, Godzilla, King of the Monsters, released stateside in spring of '56. One of the key characters in the original film, Dr. Daisuke Serizawa, was a chemical scientist who had previously seen active combat in World War II and lost his right eye, and then he basically started studies in chemistry. When Tokyo couldn't stop the monster in his first appearance, Serizawa created a bomb called the Oxygen Destroyer, which is a completely implausible device, and they used it to kill Godzilla in the original film, in which it splitted oxygen atoms and suffocates any amphibious creature within its range, which the Doctor eventually destroyed any evidence of its conception and sacrificed himself upon its detonation. The importance of Serizawa and his oxygen bomb is completely allegorical, as he made the sacrifice of his own life and the legacy of his work in order to avoid an arms race to use his work as a weapon of mass destruction. The result of the atom bomb creating Godzilla were clear enough evidence of this to him. This is important. Because Serizawa may be essential to the new film, judging from the viral campaign, and supposedly Japanese star Ken Wantanabe is going to be one of the lead characters in the new 2014 film, and speculation says that he's going to be playing the son or possibly grandson of Dr. Serizawa. There's also confirmation of other characters that will be in the Serizawa family, and there will be flashbacks to 1954 Japan. This is all technically speculation, but I'd just like to point out that the Godzilla Encounter exhibit at San Diego Comic-Con in 2013 had the Oxygen Destroyer on display, so that's not really a coincidence, I don't think. See, the original film was kind of a cautionary tale about the horrors that can ensue as a result of the use of nuclear weaponry after the bomb was dropped on Hiroshima in 1945, and the imagery is still very apparent when you go and watch the original film. Even with its dated effects, it has an impact. And the release for the American audiences had Raymond Burr portraying the story more sympathetically to the monster, as World War II was still in recent memory, ironically turning a Japanese film into what some may consider a sort of American post-war propaganda. But sympathizing with the monster ended up working on American and Japanese sides, so Godzilla was offered to fight, or alongside fight, more monsters. Toho ended up producing a total of 28 Godzilla films since its conception, and for a long time the series tried to recapture that monster magic again and again in the years following. The movies became a serialized action series through the 60s and 70s and was referred to as the Showa era, which introduced all the supporting cast monsters and Gamera, and the monsters that Godzilla fights with, and they're generally portrayed for the most part as heroic monsters, Godzilla particularly himself. The 80s and 90s tried to bring the monster series back to its grassroots, but the fan bases strongly advocated for Godzilla's future being an action series, so more kaiju battles ensued. The films, from what I remember as a kid, were entertaining, but frankly a lot of them were painful to watch all the way through, even when I was 5. I can probably count on my 2 hands the ones that actually had good stories and characters that I was able to watch all the way through rather than fast-forwarding the VHS to the monster battles. So that begs the question to me, the new Godzilla movie can't be anything like that, so what kind of movie should it be? To me, it comes down to what Godzilla means to people. And to me, Godzilla is a force of nature. Like a hurricane, he's the wrath of God descending upon us for the mistakes that we made. Oddly enough, I'd prefer it to be a movie that's from the perspective of human beings trying to fend off this thing that only exists because we made it, having to defend ourselves from the monstrosity that we made out of our own greed. Even when I was a kid, very little kid, I was the kid that cheered at the TV when the Tyrannosaurus ate the asshole lawyer, or when Jaws ate Quint. I understood that in Godzilla, there are no winners or losers. There's man and nature. Granted, I love the old movies as well for the fun the fun of monsters fighting one another, but in a way that a child can appreciate the design of the creatures and the artistry of the suits and the creatures' abilities. Godzilla himself often lost battles, and that created tension, knowing that there was always a possibility that he would lose. Maybe he could survive as well as the Undertaker surviving a wrestling match, but he could have been disintegrated, frozen, you name it. As a kid, I sympathized with the monster because I knew that he never meant to cause any destruction unless he was antagonized, mostly. Yet, with every installment, humanity recovers, and he always comes back. He recovers too. And it's about the strength and resilience of humanity and nature. It's about a cycle. And it goes without saying, it didn't take long for Godzilla films to kind of defy that. They became goofy and bad, and I'll admit that a lot of the old 60s and 70s Godzilla movies, I would fast forward to the parts with the monsters. The 80s, 90s, 2000s, they tried to kind of make compelling stories out of it as production qualities improved, but not all of them were successful, but they tried to come back to that central conflict, that cycle. So people tend to ask me why I didn't really like Pacific Rim, and why I don't think Godzilla should be like Pacific Rim. Well, I guess this is my opportunity to kind of try to fully describe it. The robots in Pacific Rim looked amazing. The monsters were really boring and unoriginal in design. And I say this, considering that the way that they became more frequent and larger in size, I began to realize that, one, they started to just look dark and muddy and all had like blue neon stripes, and while they had their own unique abilities, their features looked kind of unoriginal and almost reminiscent of things of our own world, even though, spoiler alert, they're actually aliens. So that kind of confused me a bit. But the monsters in Godzilla
and Rodan want to fight each other. They want apologies from each other. They're both so bull-headed.
Okay, well, they tried, but they did their best. But
Mothra is still trying.
These monsters are as stupid as human beings.
Okay, the monsters had their own personalities about them. Technically. But I digress. Because our protagonists in that movie were giant robots! But the robots matched the monsters in size and ability for the most part. I didn't feel a tension or a struggle in terms of their, ability to fight these monsters, even though they were losing pretty frequently. And that's because I didn't care about the characters. That's what it boils down to. The characters, to me, were mindless and poorly acted caricatures and stereotypes. And I didn't care about the outcome of the pilots that were in control of these robots, even though the robots looked cool. That being said, the actual choreography of the film was incredible. But that shouldn't be the highlight of the new Godzilla movie to me. Even though I am excited to see him do some fighting, I think that in a case like this, less is more. So let me point out a specific scene of Pacific Rim, where one of the main characters, the Chinese girl Mako, she first gets put into the drift with Charlie Hunnam's character, and he sees a memory of the first time that she's, in the middle of a kaiju attack, and she's a small child, and this memory was the most captivating part of the entire film to me. A small child, powerless against the evil malice force. She's running and screaming for her parents and has no hope of survival, when then Idris Elba suddenly comes in and saves her. But see, that's the thing. This was the most interesting to me because while the fight scenes in Pacific Rim looked amazing, this stuck out to me because it's happening at ground level. It's happening where the humans are. In order for an audience to connect with something in that way, we have to see the scale from a human perspective. And we got that minimally in Pacific Rim. This works in other monster movies too, like J.J. Abrams' 2008 movie Cloverfield, where in that story it's filmed by a normal guy with a handycam trying to escape from the city. His friends are getting picked off one by one. And even on a rewatch, you can kind of catch that the monster is actually like a child alien and was suddenly awoken by a deep slumber. It didn't mean to, destroy anything unless it was antagonized, much like Godzilla used to be. That being said, the new Godzilla movie should have destruction, because it's Godzilla. Godzilla and destruction go hand in hand, but I have destruction fatigue. Even in 2013, Star Trek Into Darkness, Man of Steel, Pacific Rim, It's like these movies are doing this destruction level of detail and destruction. While it looks great, it's pornographic and kind of disconnected. It's destruction for the sake of showing off the effects. Now, Godzilla movies have done this in the past with models, but it was always at its most effective in the original when, nothing like it had been seen, and it resonated with people because of its truthful context. It was a science fiction that felt really, really close to reality. And, like I said, it's a cautionary tale, which is why it should be depicted as an unstoppable force of nature, not something consciously being destroyed by, heroes and villains, like, Captain Kirk crashing the ship, Obi-Wan Kenobi crashing a ship, Superman throwing things so that he doesn't really care who survives or not. That destruction worked for the original Godzilla film because, for one, that level of detail of destruction had never been seen in a movie before, and it was reminiscent of a pre-existing tragedy. So it needs to be a tragedy movie. But more importantly, Godzilla needs tragedy for humans and a tragedy for nature to really work. That's the ideal movie for me. So when someone says to me, oh, it should totally be like Pacific Rim, instinctively, I say no. Now, I won't judge you for wanting to think that, maybe because that movie, while it had its problems, was entertaining to no end. But a Godzilla movie should be different to me. When it should take notice instead of the good Godzilla movies, the ones that tried to recapture the meaning of the first one, its original message, square one, ground zero, for lack of a better term. So obviously, I gotta mention the Roland Emmerich movie now. The problem I had with that is the same issue that I had with Man of Steel, where it takes an iconic character and it just makes it something that, to me, isn't what that character originally represented. I feel like, I know a lot of people, some people don't feel that way, but if you take Man of Steel or Roland Emmerich's Godzilla movie and replace that protagonist or that creature with something completely different, it's an original movie, and it could be a really cool original movie, but it misrepresents that character that you've already come to know and love. So, more specifically, Godzilla 98 takes its own liberties in the mythology, and by making Godzilla really easily to defeat, ultimately, by a couple of homing missiles as long as he's tied down by a bridge. Look, I can deal with making him female or asexual, I can deal with the baby lizards a little bit, but the part that bothered me was his mortality level. The fact that he was able to be taken down by just a couple of guided missiles by the American military. That to me just says, like, oh, we saw Jurassic Park 2. That's not Godzilla to me. Believe it or not, that wasn't Godzilla to Toho either, because they actually took that character, considered it canon, named it Zilla instead of Godzilla, because he's not godly very much, and he reappears in the last Godzilla movie made by Japan, Final Wars, where the two face off in Australia, and it lasts about 15 seconds, and they use bad rock music, and it was really funny. I'll link to it here. But I need to get to my point really, really fast, because this is running long. As I've grown older, the more time goes between when I actually watch Godzilla movies that aren't the original movie, and there's a reason for that. I was filled with childlike wonder watching the Godzilla movies because of the monsters themselves more than anything, and I was excited by their potential for fun stories. And the action from Pacific Rim could play into that, but if Gareth Edwards wants to recreate that emotional impact that the original movie had, it needs something more. That emotion that would have struck with both American and Japanese audiences in the original film is complicated because, as I was saying, you sympathize with both the creature and the people. That was lost with time, and sometimes the Godzilla movies from Japan would even not acknowledge this. Like 2001's Giant Monsters All-Out Attack portrayed Godzilla as the villain and the other monsters as guardians, heroes. But even still, that disconnected, that pegged the conflict upon the monsters themselves and kind of made the humans just a part of the backdrop, even though the story and the characters were actually pretty good. So, as Hollywood movies, I can't really hold it against Pacific Rim or Godzilla 98, ultimately, if they have simple stories or bad characters, but I always have hope that when you get down to the level of writing quality, that there's always potential for strong characters and a meaningful story, in the same way that I hope that for any genre of a movie, action, animated, anything. And I hope that with Godzilla, in the same way that Star Wars fans hope Episode 7 doesn't repeat the mistakes of the sequels, I feel the same way. This is, in essence, my Star Wars. I want it to be good. I want it to be good so I can share it with this mythology and cast of creatures I've come to love my whole life with other people. So it needs to be watchable. So really what I'm hoping for is something completely new. I don't want destruction for destruction's sake, because I've seen that way too much this year alone. For the level of Godzilla's destruction, it's got to be unique to itself. That emotional impact needs to be there. And I think I have faith looking at Gareth Edwards' first directorial debut, Monsters. On my Young Folks article that I wrote when the movie when the trailer first came up, I linked to that movie. His cinematography, it very clearly shows that he cares about showing how humans can live in a coexisting world with monsters like that, but keep it on a human level. And then there's Bryan Cranston. Seriously, he can do anything that he wants. He picked this movie. Make no mistake, Bryan Cranston wanted to be in this movie. So that's pretty much all I have to say. What do you guys think? I really would love to know what you think, because I think that I'm just kind of talking myself in circles here. So comment below. Go to theyoungfolks.com. We're on Facebook, and we are on Twitter as @TYFofficial. And yeah, let me know what you guys want to see in a Godzilla movie. Other than that, I'll see you next time.